Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. It's Jose here, welcoming you to another opinion piece. Some alcohol fuel thoughts that I've got. I did a video at the beginning of last year talking about the problems with modern fantasy, so I thought it was only fair to discuss what the problems may be with classic fantasy, and then have a bit of a conversation with myself around that issue. And please, comment, let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Am I totally misguided here? What do you think? Please let me know. So I've tried to summarize that in 5 key points. So here we go. Number 1, classic fantasy for some people actually has got too much fantasy. Who would have thought that dealing with elves, dwarves, gnomes, dragons, minotaurs, all sorts of fantastical creatures is asking too much of some people? And my thoughts there are, well, if you don't like too much fantasy, then fantasy is not for you, is it? Now, I understand what this issue may come from. If your only knowledge, if you've been brought up with fantasy in a post, just to put a date on it, 1995, yeah, why not? So if all you know about fantasy is Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, dare I say, Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson stuff, there is not a lot of fantasy there. So all of a sudden, to be thrown into the world of Tolkien, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, or things of the sort, it's asking people too much. And that I find a little bit weird. But hey ho, there you go. For some people, classic fantasy is too much fantasy. Point number 2, and I think this is actually a fair criticism, with the risk of generalizing, as usual, not necessarily always the case, but classic fantasy has got fairly flat characters, by which I mean that the characters are fairly one-dimensional, by which I mean that there is a very clear distinction between good and bad characters. There's no shades of grey here, not even 50 shades, just 1, 2 or 3. There is no Game of Thrones character arcs where you start hating one character and end up loving them and vice versa. There is no middle ground here. The good guys are very clearly good guys and the bad guys are very clearly bad guys, and that's as it is and that's as it stands throughout the whole series. Now, as I said, this is the risk of generalizing, but pretty much, you know, from the word go, say, let's go back to Grandpa Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, the good guys are the good guys and the bad guys are the bad guys, and that's all there is to it. And coupled with that, there tends to be little character arc, character development, the characters arrive and exit pretty much done. Again, I'm just generalizing here, but if you've grown up, say, in the world of the First Law by Joe Abercrombie, Lord Grimdark himself, and you, and I understand and I appreciate that his character work is utterly fantastic, then going back to something from the 70s and 80s may seem fairly flat, like a beer that has been left open for way too long. Point number 3, I've seen this discussed on internet forums around, and it's the issue of magic, the magic system, the criticism that I've seen leveled at classic fantasy is that magic is a deus ex machina device to get characters out of sticky situations and advance the plot. Now, I think that is a relatively fair criticism. I think that's possibly one of the trappings of a soft magic system. But when people level those criticisms, show me where that is the case. Let's go back to Grandpa Tolkien. When does magic get the characters out of a fairly difficult situation just because the magic allows it? I'm not entirely sure. You see, when our characters are fighting orcs and a warrior is wielding a sword and a wizard is throwing magic missiles, well, that's just tools of the trade. And if our characters have to climb down a ravine and the warrior and the thief climb down using a rope, and the wizard uses his magic featherfall spell to fall down gently, that's not really a deus ex machina moment. So where are these instances of magic bailing out our superheroes? But I can understand why some people may be reluctant, particularly if you've grown used to the hard magic systems developed by Brandon Sanderson and to a similar degree by Brent Weeks, particularly in his Lightbringer series. Now. Point number 4. I didn't know this was an issue, but I can see why it might be an issue. It's a word I guess what it means, but I've never seen it before. And it is that classic fantasy can be very heteronormative. And I'm guessing what that means is that there is too much straight sexuality, male, female love affairs, and there's not enough representation of different genders, sexual inclinations. But yes, that's fair. But the risk of leveling that criticism at classic fantasy is decontextualizing from the time when it was written. So again, just to put a date on it, classic fantasy, I would date it pre-1995, but just choosing a random date here. The year is subject to debate. But back in the 70s, 60s, 80s, beginning part of the 90s, the world was pretty heteronormative, and being homosexual, being bisexual, being anything sexual was fairly uncommon, or it was kept very closeted, and the books written at the time were partly a product of their time. I am aware that there's a lot more fantasy these days that incorporates peoples of different inclinations and sexual preferences, and that's fine by me. I haven't got an issue. But if you're looking for different sexualities in classic fantasy, you're not going to find it. That's fair. Then again, I've always said in this channel, and I remain convinced, that actually 99% of the time a character's sexuality bears no relevance to the plot whatsoever. My opinion. I could be wrong, let me know. And finally, point number 5. Again, I've seen this leveled, and it is the fact that classic fantasy is very white Eurocentric. Again, you need to understand Grandpa Tolkien. Grandpa Tolkien was an Oxford scholar. He was a classics student. He translated the great Nordic sagas Beowulf into English, and The Lord of the Rings was just the vehicle to present the languages that he created. And him being Grandpa Tolkien and the ever important go-to totemic origin of the genre that we know and love, a lot of people drank from that source, and a lot of fantasy is a little bit derivative of that, and his influence very clearly is white Eurocentric, because that's what he was. In this day and age, modern fantasy, there's been a lot more authors coming from different ethnic backgrounds, setting their books and their stories in different cultural settings, and that's great. And if that's what you like, go get it. But again, trying to level criticism at things without a time contextualization, I think, is a little bit misguided. But without those considerations, I can see why people may have issues with classic fantasy. So anyway, these are my thoughts on the topic. This is what I've got for today. As usual, thank you ever so much for watching, taking the time to listen to me and what I've got to say. Please like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think. As always, once again, take loads and loads of care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.